Stock index futures are popular tools whenever we are to use them in order to change the beta for a stock portfolio. Now we know that beta is one of the risk factors which is taken into consideration wherever we talk from the point of view of equity portfolios or equity fund management, because beta is the measure of systematic risk of our portfolio to the market. So beta basically explains us how sensitive our equity or stock portfolio is vis-a-vis the broad market. So a popular tool which gets used by fund managers, especially when they're to adjust the beta for the portfolio. Now let's say beta is the current portfolio's beta. So for a certain portfolio, this is the current amount of beta which you're holding. VA is the current value of the portfolio. VF is the value of the stocks underlying one futures contract, because we know that for every futures contract we have certain number of underlyings. So let's say we are talking for a certain index future. Then for index future, we'll have a specific number of underlyings which are pre-specified. So that's also related to the lot size concept, and we know what is the exact underlying or what is the number of underlyings which are there for a futures. So VF, we call it the value of stocks underlying that contract. Now, formula for optimal number of contracts to be hedged. So this is the formula which we have discussed on the previous slide. So we calculate N star using beta and the current value of the portfolio and the current value of the stocks underlying the futures contract. Now, if we are to adjust the beta of from the current value of beta to a certain target value of beta star. So let's say the fund manager wants to move from the beta value which we are currently depicted by beta for the portfolio to a certain number beta star. So this transition has to be done. Now, in order to make that transition, we can take a position in futures contract. So the adjustment is given as N star is beta star minus beta into VA by VF. And always remember, whenever we have to increase the beta for the portfolio, we have to go long the futures contract. And whenever we have to decrease or reduce the beta for the portfolio, we have to go short the futures contract. Now that's natural, isn't it? Because the more we take positions in futures, or the long positions on the futures contract is going to help us push the beta higher, because we are willing to take on more amount of such exposure. Whereas whenever we are shorting something, you can imagine that we are trying to shy away from the beta and we are trying to reduce the beta. So that's how you can remember the usage of positions, a long and short, for increase and decrease of beta for the position. Now we'll discuss a simple example as well, how exactly this beta gets adjusted. So let's take an investor who is holding an equity portfolio worth $50 billion, and the beta for the position is, let's say, 1.2. The S&P futures price is 2000 at the moment, and one futures contract is for a delivery of 250 multiplied by the index. So a standard contract specification as we'll find on any exchange's website. Now, investor wants to hedge their position using equity futures. That is, they are trying to have a net beta position to be zero, or they're trying to eliminate the beta exposure. So a couple of steps. First step is to calculate the number of contracts or optimal number of contracts. So we use the formula for N star, which we have discussed earlier, and we just plug in the numbers. So 1.2 is the beta, 50 million is the current value of our equity portfolio, and divided by 2000 into 250, which is the multiple for the futures price. This comes out to be 120. So this means this is the optimal number of contracts. That is, the investor has to short 120 contracts on the S&P futures in order to hedge their position. That is because they are holding a certain beta of 1.2 and they are trying to have a net beta position of the portfolio to be equal to zero. So they are trying to eliminate that risk from beta. So that is, they would have to decrease the beta of their portfolio. That's why they have to go short those many contracts. So they short these many number of futures contracts. That brings their net beta position of the portfolio to be zero. And this is one adjustment which can be done using futures. Now, let's say instead of having a net zero position, the fund manager or investor wants to change the beta. That is, yes, they are comfortable with holding a beta which is slightly higher than the market, so they are fine with the sensitivity. Rather, they may want to push the beta because they may have a certain view on a certain have a certain view about the market and they would be bullish on that. So that way they may want to increase the beta or increase the systematic risk of their portfolio. So again, that can be done via a futures. So take the same investor as the previous example, and instead of having a requirement for net zero beta, if the investor wishes to push the beta to 2. So what would be the strategy? Again, we use a formula which we have discussed earlier. So we have a target beta, that is beta star, which is given as 2, and beta is 1.2, which is the current beta. So we plug in the numbers, so 2 minus 1.2 into VA by VF, which is the current value of my portfolio divided by the value of the futures contract, which I'm planning to use. So 2000 into the multiple of 250, which comes out to be 80. Now, in order to hedge the equity portfolio, the investor will have to go long 80 number of shares. Now, why we say we have to go long the futures position here? Because we are trying to push the beta higher. And we know that whenever we have to increase the beta of our portfolio, we have to take a long position.